Hi, I'm Kristen, and today I'm gonna show you some pot holders I've been making. So I'm gonna do a double pot holder. You know, you put your two hands in, you hold the pot like that, and then just a little square one with that cute little hook.
Actually, this video got too long, so those square pot holders are going to be in a second video.
As I think I've mentioned before, either on the channel or in my email newsletter, I'm wanting to get a jump start on Christmas this year. I kind of try and do it every year, but with the homemade gifts, I end up starting earlier and earlier. But anyway, I think it's November now that I'm filming this, so I don't think I'm too early anymore and I need to get going. So I'm going to show you these two types of pot holders, great for scraps, great for gifts, and really simple, small projects that you can finish in an evening and just get that sense of satisfaction of being done.
In case you're new to the channel, here is a bit about what I do here. I try to be beginner friendly. If there's anything you don't understand, please do ask me in the comments. Consider myself a confident beginner, so I'm hoping I'm speaking on your level, but sometimes I go too fast. I do what I call minimal measuring. There is a fair amount of measuring in this particular project, but you might see, for example, that I cut things a bit bigger than they need to be so I can trim them down and be less precise. But the flip side of that is I have a kind of no waste policy in my sewing room. So if I'm making extra trimmings because I'm cutting things bigger to start off with, I'm going to use those trimmings in other projects like cushions and bean bags and things like that, so I don't throw stuff out. I also value just getting on with sewing rather than planning ahead for perfection. So you're going to see some problem solving of issues that come up, which I hope will help you deal with any issues that come up with your own sewing. I also would stress that you're going to see me break quilting rules, and I hope that seeing that it all turns out okay in the end will give you some license to break the quilting rules that don't make sense for you as well.
Okay, double pot holder. Here's what I've cut. So I've got one layer of batting. I think that's an 80-20, not sure. And one layer of insul-bright. So this is I'm not sure if you can see this on the camera, probably not. My lighting is always ridiculous. Anyway, it's kind of got like a metallic something in it, and it's heat resistant. So this is the stuff that you use for pot holders, oven mitts, things like that. So I've got basically two layers of batting, one of which is heat resistant, which is optional. Some people just do 2 layers of batting. Some people do 3 layers of batting. Some people do 2 layers of insul-bright. It's kind of up to you, but this is what I'm doing. So these two are 35 by 8 inches, so 35 long, 8 inches wide. It's a little bigger than I probably need because I'm going to quilt it all before I bind it and finally trim it. So I'm going to kind of probably curve the edges at the top. So I'll show you that later. But anyway, I looked up on Amazon, and the kind of double pot holders that we're selling on Amazon are roughly between 33 and 35 inches long, and they're about 7 and something wide. So we've got some space to trim up once we've quilted, right? And then I've got 2 long pieces, same size, of gray. This pot holder's for my sister. If you've seen the channel before, I make stuff for her and she wants it all in shades of gray. I'm gonna put a pop of color in here for her, but we're basing gray. We're starting with gray for her anyway. But you know I like scraps, so if you don't have something that's quite this long or you want to use stuff up, you could piece this, right? But generally 35 by 8, two layers up. So one's for the backing and one's for the front, okay? So that's the main body of the double oven mitt. Then I've got 2 pieces of leftover batting. So this is 2. Let me just double check what size they are, because who can remember? So that looks like about 8.5 by 8 or something. No, 9.25 by 8. Okay, again, we're going to trim these down so it's not a huge deal. But this is for, so when you've got your double oven mitt, you put your hands in, this bit that goes on top of your hands, so the decorative bit. So there's one for either end. All my little scraps on there. And what I'm going to use is some gray again. So it's the same gray. And we're going to layer it. So it's going to be this. Well, not layer it. Piece it. This is going to be the bottom. So the little curve would go here. And then I've got some Tula Pink Tea Cups. I've got one long strip, but this is for both. So in half, you see. And this is going to go at the top. But so this is enough for both. I'm just going to piece it together and then cut it. So this is, well, it'll be 8. So 16. Yeah, sorry. So these are, so these are 6 by 8, these gray pieces. And these are 2 1/4 by 16, these. And I'll show you later once I piece the strips, I'll show you how I'm going to cut this, because I want to make sure I get like the 3 teacups in the middle, so that when I'm trimming, I'm just trimming here. Now, obviously that's just because I'm using this particular Tula Pink fabric. If you're using something else, we don't have to worry about the fabric placement. But this is me adding a pop of color to my sister's life. She's a big tea drinker and she's a big gray fan, so we're combining. Then I've got some bias tape just to like edge the top of the mitt bit. But you could use binding if you prefer, so just whatever. But this one is, so similar, it's the same length, so it's 16 inches or a little bit longer. Okay, so that's going to be our 2 mitt bits. And then I've got just some binding strips for all the way around. I'll try and measure. I haven't pieced these are just bits. This is 2 1/4. Usually I do my binding 2 1/2, but with small projects, I sometimes find the 2 1/2 inch binding looks like it's swallowing things. So I've gone for 2 1/4 this time. So, okay. So that's all we need for the double oven mitt. So the first thing we're going to do, move this out of the way, is baste these 4 layers. So if this were, this is a solid, but if it was a print, you'd want right side out. And your 2 layers of batting. And I think you should put the insul-bright on the bottom, because that's the side that's going to touch the pot, like this. So insul-bright, then batting, then your top fabric. So again, if this was patterned, it would be pattern side up. Baste the whole thing, and then we're going to quilt it however you want. I'm going to do straight lines. So I'm going to go ahead, baste this, quilt this, and then we'll get to making the top pocket bit.
So this is me basting the 4 layers with my micro stitch tagging gun. I've got another video about what that is and how to use it if you're interested. But honestly, for a project this small, the basting was a bit of a faff because then you have to take the tags out loads, and it would be the same if it was pins. So because we've given ourselves so much extra room at the edges, you could almost just wing it and hold it with your hands until you get the first few quilting stitches in. I probably wouldn't take the time to baste this if I was doing it again, to be honest. Anyways, so I did straightish lines. I'm not sure they're going to come out entirely straight when I trim, but I decided to just go with the easiest, cleanest look. I'm kind of spacing it roughly with my finger. I'm kind of, don't know if you can see it, but I'm holding my finger beside the presser foot to space. So those lines are roughly my finger wide, but it's not perfect, and that's fine with me. So next I pieced together right sides to right sides, those 2 accent strips for the outside potholder bit. And now I'm just measuring and trimming. So because I'm using this Tula Pink fabric, I just want to make sure that when I find the middle mark of this strip where I'm going to cut it into 2, that I'm still going to get 3 teacups on either side. So I'm just going to slice through that green teacup. So you kind of need half a teacup, 3 teacups, and then half, and then it should work if you're using the same fabric. Obviously, if you're not, don't worry. Now, I'm not showing it on camera, but I am pressing the pieces so those 2 accent strips, I've pressed that unit now. And now I'm just sewing it right sides to right sides with the gray bit. Now, of course, you could do this all in one strip set. So the gray pieces could have been one long piece as well, but it's just the scraps I had were not that long. So I cut the sizes I needed. So you should end up with this. And then here is the backing fabric I forgot earlier, which should be, a little bit bigger. Again, we're going to trim it. So, 9.5 by 8.5, whatever. Then we're layering those 3. So just the 1 layer of batting in here. You could put insul-bright in it if you want, but you're not really going to hold the pot holder that way. So it's probably not necessary. To quilt these sections, I decided to leave the teacups pretty much unquilted and just kind of top stitch either side of the ditch on the gray and the teal fabric, or the green fabric, however you're seeing that. And then I use that same finger space sort of straightish line in the accent fabric and the gray. So but this time I'm going horizontally instead of vertically, so it might look a bit funny when, when it goes together with the longer piece, but everything should be roughly spaced the same, so it should definitely look like it fits together. That was the idea anyway. But of course you can quilt these however you like, go super fancy, go super minimal, you know, it's up to you. But I just wanted to go with the path of least resistance and get them done quickly. So I went ahead and trimmed the excess backing and other fabric off the top of this section just to get it straight with the batting. And then I took some bias tape. Full disclosure, I am not a bias tape expert. I've only used it a few times. But what I did was take some bias tape that wasn't double fold and I folded it. Because there's two types of bias tape. But I kind of buy other people's remnants of things, including this. So I didn't have the double fold that you're meant to use for stuff like this. So anyway, I opened up what I think was the short side, which is what you're meant to attach to the back, and sewed along the crease line. So where it's already folded, there'll be a fold already in the bias tape. So that's what I sewed along. And then when I get to the other end, then you fold the whole thing over and sew as close to the edge as you can, just like you would with quilt binding. So I did the same for both of them, and it turned out okay. I think once it was folded, I think this bias tape was like a 1/2 inch wide, but I probably could have used slightly smaller. There was a little bit of gappage at the top, if that's the word, where it wasn't like totally snug with the quilted piece, if that makes sense. But again, I was just using remnants of things that were the right color. So just making it work, and my sister is not going to notice, and it looks totally fine. So basically, if you have leftover bits, it's perfect for this because you only need 8 inches long per, pot holder decorative top bit. We don't have a name for that part of it. But anyway, so you just need little remnants for that, so you can use anything you have left over that goes with the colors. When I do the square pot holders a little bit later in the video, I'll show you more close up with better video what I meant by the short side of the bias tape. But you could also use leftover bits of quilt binding for this if you don't have bias tape. So you don't have to use it if you're not comfortable with it or you don't have it. So here's my big long piece, and what I'm going to do now is get a curve on the end. So I've got this bowl, and I'm going to be trimming the sides anyway because it's not quite right here, so this is fine. I'm just going to make sure I've got the top of the bowl with the batting under it. And then I've got, this is like a chalk pen, or yeah, chalk pen, I think that's what it is. I think it's supposed to be in something. Maybe it's a refill and I don't know where the actual pen is, but anyway. So this should be making some sort of mark. I'm just going down to the side. There. Probably hard to see on the camera, but I can see it there. So it's a white line going this way, and so then my straight line would follow down here with the rulers, right? So I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. Okay, and I'm going to double check this. I'm going to do one end, and then I'm going to fold it and make sure that these lines line up with each other. And these ones we're going to wait. So we're going to trim the big long one and then use that as a template to trim the ends of this and the width as well, so that it fits on it before we finish everything up. So I'm going to cut the curve with scissors, and then I'm going to go to my cutting mat and cut the straight, trim the edges with a big long straight ruler and my rotary cutter. So I can see that this curve goes in a bit more, so I'm just going to start here and cut all this away. I'm going to get over here again. Instead of going straight down that line, I'm going to go down until the curve kind of stops a bit, and then I'll just angle off, and I can save that trimming for when I've got the big ruler and my rotary cutter.
So it's just that. And then I've got the other end. So what I want to do is this, and just kind of check that we're roughly centered where our curve is, and that that's going to match up. I think it'll be fine. So I'm just going to do this bit now. And then hopefully that top curve, we're not worried about sides, but that top curve should be roughly the same, and it is. So then I'm going to go put this on my bigger cutting mat and just trim up the sides of it. Okay, so I didn't record some of that trimming. Anyways, what I'm doing now, I'll try and show you as best I can. What I'm doing now is I've folded it in half. I trimmed a bit of the side off, but now I still need to fix a bit of the curve. So on one side it's right, and the other side it's not quite, but we still got that wiggle room to trim that we put in with the measurements, so that's fine. So I'm putting my bowl back on, and I'm drawing just another line down here to decide where I want to trim. So you've not really missed much. So I want to trim this, and I want to kind of just squidge in that bit. So this is the line on this side, and it's going to match up with the line up here is what I want it to do. So I'm going to line this. We'll take care of this little corner at the end, but right now what I'm going to do is line, because I've already trimmed this, so I know that's a straight line. So I'm going to line this up where I want to be. I've got two of these big rulers, but you could just shimmy yours along if you've only got one. And I'm lining it up with a ruler on my cutting mat. Okay, so that's a bit better. And then I just want to round this little corner like that, and then this one over here. Just want to kind of make it go like that. That's better. And I did cut short with the backing here, but I'm hoping it'll get covered by the binding. So whoops. But anyway, so that is, let's just round this teeny. There we go. Okay, so I've got this now trimmed, and it is, let's just see, from here to here. So it's 34 inches long, and it is exactly 7 inches wide, which is fine. Okay, so now I guess you have to decide which side is the front, which side is the back. I've decided the bit with the missing backing is going to be the back, even though my binding is going to be closer there. I might just scooch in a little piece of fabric in there to cover that up. Anywho, right, so next I'm going to put these at either end and flip the whole thing over. And we're going to decide, so we've got to make sure first of all that the batting, so because I've got a bit of, I'm going to trim this off first. That's going to make it easier. So I'm going to trim off this excess backing fabric so I can just see where my batting is for this. So I'm lining this up with the batting, not with anything on the cutting mat. Right, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to put this way because this is the good side. I'm going to light it up here. And this way. Okay. And now I want to make sure that they're the same length as each other before we do anything else. So that's 9.5 and 9.5. So that's fine. So the pockets are 9.5 inches long, And then the other thing that I want to do is center my teacups. So I'm going to make sure my teacups are centered. And then I'm going to just grab one pin, this here. And then center my teacups here again. And this is just for this particular fabric, obviously. But if you have something else fussy cut in the middle, you know. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to flip it back over again. I've centered those. Now I'm just going to trim around the edge. You can go ahead and mark them with the chalk again and do it that way if you want. I'm going to try and do it with my rotary cutter. I just feel like it'll be easier. So I am going to use a ruler for the straight edge. And then curve myself around. Okay, and so that's that curve matching on that side. And then I'll turn around and do this one. I just want to adjust this one a teensy bit. There we go. Well, that's better. And there it is on that side. So we got to attach them together. But before I do that, I've got this little wee bit here that I just want to put something on top of for now, so that when I'm attaching this, that can start to get stitched down, and then once it's cut in the binding, it'll all be fine. So I just need a little scrap of this gray. It's not exactly the same color, but it's close enough. So I'm gonna fold it so that I don't have a raw edge here. And I'm gonna cut this here. I'm just gonna iron this 1 second. Okay, so I've ironed this in half. It's probably 2.5 inch, a little bit of, I'm just putting it a little bit over where it doesn't cover the batting. And I'm just gonna pin it there. And then when I go and attach the rest of this, I will trim off the excess. So hang on, let me just get this pinned. It's a lot of layers. Ooh, there we go, pinned. So I could trim a little bit now, but I'm gonna have it this way and sew this. Just make sure that pin's not squishing it. All right, so I'm just gonna sew this on first before we do any binding or anything like that. And then I'll trim this extra bit off. And then we just need to like hand stitch this teensy bit at the end to cover that hole. That's my my backing for either for a pot holder or for a quilt. This is my how to fix when the backing just doesn't go exactly to the edge. Is we're just gonna sew in an extra piece and then we just stitch this down. So the next step really is to take this to the machine and just sew down this pocket with a 1/4 inch seam, and then we'll add our binding. What I'm doing here is starting at the top of my bound pocket, and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm just back stitching a bit over that, and then I'm just going to go all the way around to the other end, and then I'm going to stop and do the other end, and then we'll add our binding. And where I can see that I haven't cut this curve exactly right, I'm following the curve underneath, which was the one that I felt was a bit better. and I'll just trim the excess later. And back stitch to the end, and then I don't need the pin. So I just need to trim this little teensy bit that's just a little bit more than the curve that I wanted there. And again, some of you will be so much more precise than me, and this will all look so much better than mine, but that's fine. Right, this side now, which is the side with this little doodad that we want to attach as well. So I'm going to take the pin out and just hold this where I want it now.
You're going to see me lifting my presser foot quite a bit when I'm going around the curve. That's just to do a little bit of moving the needle around to get around that curve, which is why I do like the hover foot on my faff, because it just lifts for me and I can turn those corners a little bit smoother. But of course I wanted to play with my new sewing machine, which I told you about in my video a couple weeks ago. So if you missed that, you can go and see what machine I'm using and why I'm using it for this rather than the one that has the fancy hover foot that would probably have made the curves easier.
So now take that out, and I'm going to trim this, which I don't need around the edge. And then if we turn it over, you can see I've just got this little flip. So it's going to get another stitch with the binding and another one again, and then it'll just be a tiny bit probably that needs to get hand sewn. So, and then I'm just going to trim off anything that's a bit more than it needs to be around this curve. There we go. And then the other end had a little bit of excess somewhere. There it was, there. Cool. Now, binding. So, or finishing, right? So a lot of the time on these pot holders, you would use
Bias tape.
binding like I used here. And we could do that. And I might do that for the smaller pot holders that I'm going to show you later. But I had some of this fabric, and so I'm just going to do a regular quilt binding, machine quilt binding. So there will be a stitch around the back that you can see when I stitch down my binding on the top, but it's on the back and it's a pot holder. So we're not stressed about that. But you can, if you have double fold
Bias tape.
you could use that. Or if you have other binding methods that you want to use, you can use that. But what I've done is used, sorry, I'm just turning my threads. What did I cut? I cut 2 1/4 inch fabric strips instead of 2 1/2 like I normally would, just to make it less bulky. Because the way well, I'll show you in a minute. But anyway, when you fold over the binding, if with 2 1/2, it would go quite far in. And then you're kind of losing more of the pattern and stuff that you want. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do, is use a slightly thinner binding. So let's do that next.
So I turned the double oven mitt over so that it's right side facing down. And then I have my folded binding strips raw edge to the raw edge of the pot holder. And when I get to the curve, I'm just kind of slowly trying to inch this stuff around. I'm going to be honest, the curve looks better if you use the binding tape than the quilt binding. There's definitely a skill to this, and I'm just kind of winging it, doing it with the quilt binding here. But if you're in a kind of make it work moment or a use what you have moment, then you can absolutely use quilt binding. We're going to clip the curves, I'll show you that a little bit later, to make that sit a bit flatter, but the bias tape is meant to curve, so it's always going to look neater. I used bias tape on another double oven mitt that I made before this one for myself. This one's for my sister, using some pre-quilted fabric. Basically, that it was the start of a quilt as you go on a long arm project that I changed halfway through. I have another video about it, but anyway, this was what was left over and didn't get turned into a quilt, so I turned it into a pot holder, and I used bias tape for the curve on that one, and it did, I think, turn out a little bit neater. I'm going to show you the bias tape on the square pot holders later on and how to join the ends of that, but if you are using quilt binding, it's the same as you would do on your quilts. When you get to this point, I cut 2.5 inches overlap of the two ends and then sort of squish them under the machine and sew my diagonal line and then trim off the excess, and usually that fits. If you need a slower explanation of that, please watch the late Melanie Ham's machine binding quilt series. She's got these videos on YouTube, and that's how I learned to machine bind, so I always want to send people to those videos when I can. And then we just stitch it down. Once that binding is all stitched down on the back, before we flip it over and stitch it to the front, what we're going to do is trim the curve, basically. So you just sort of cut little notches. This is the same anytime, I guess, you're sewing curves. Really, this helps them to lay flatter. You're not cutting through the seam line. You're just cutting little notches to help everything kind of lay flatter. So once that's done, flip it over to the front and just pull the binding over all the raw edges and stitch down with a kind of 3 stitch length. So just look a little bit wider than you'd use for piecing to make it pretty. Really close to the edge of the quilt binding. And I'll just slow down this curve for you. What you're going to find if you're using quilt binding instead of bias tape is that at the bottom of the curve, because we clip those seams to make it, you know, lie flatter and stuff. Otherwise it would bunch, so you do still need to do that. But it's going to look a bit fatter, basically, the binding at the curve. So that's the issue with using the quilt binding. There possibly are tricks that, and if you know them, please put them in the comments for other folk, because I don't know them. But it does still work, and it looks neat enough. You know, I've shown it to people before I decided to wrap it up and send it to Canada for my sister for Christmas. And they couldn't notice. They said it was like the issues that I was seeing with the curve and the quilt binding versus the bias tape was like a quilter's eye or a sewer's eye kind of an issue to them. They couldn't see the problem. So you definitely can use quilt binding if you don't have the bias tape. And I knew that she would like the gray edging more than any other colors that I had in my box of remnants of bias tape and stuff. So, and I knew she definitely would not like a multicolored bias tape binding because I didn't have anything long enough for this. I'm going to speed this one up because this is already a really long video, and this is just basically more of the same. So we're just sewing down the rest of the binding and covering the raw edge, and eventually we'll have to go around that corner again. I think the second corner that I did was perhaps even a bit wider than the first one, so maybe you can see a little bit better the issue that I was talking about, with it just looking a little bit strange. But we're also on one of these curves sewing down that little bit of fabric that I had to paste in as a little fix as well. So if you're making mistakes like this in your sewing, you can always do stuff to remedy it. I hope you can kind of see that from me sharing my little boo-boos with you. And also, really, other people don't see them the way that we see them. We nitpick over these things, and other people really don't notice them, I promise. So here is the finished double oven mitt. There's the side where the teacups are centered the way I meant them to be. And now here is the side where they're a little bit off despite my efforts, but that's okay. So I made my sister some matching square pot holders to go with the double oven mitt. I was going to put this whole thing in this video as well, and then I was like, it's getting way too long. Let's split it up. So there's going to be a second video with the simpler square pot holders. Much easier, much quicker to go together. So if you watch this one and you like the idea of giving a pot holder as a gift, but you think the double oven mitt's just a bit too much faff, you might like these square ones. So that'll be the next video I put out. It'll either be slightly later this week. I might have 2 videos this week, or it might be next Monday. So look out for that if you're interested. And there will also be blog posts with all of the measurements that I used written out if you find I'm talking too fast or whatever. So just go ahead and head to my blog. The link's in the description. You can join the email list and you'll always get the video links and the blog links when they go out. Thanks so much for spending all of this time with me if you're here to the end. And if you're not already subscribed and you like scrappy, no stress sewing projects, then please do subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Bye.